Simon, I'd like to discuss the process of moving from an LOI to now kind of a purchase agreement. When do you grant exclusivity for one buyer, or do you try to maintain a couple of parties that are negotiating on a purchase and sale agreement? Like, how do you maintain that competitive auction or that competitive tension throughout the process to closing?
Yeah, it differs on every deal. I literally just closed one Monday where the private equity house was not in exclusivity, and they closed that transaction, did all their work knowing they weren't in exclusivity, and we had told them, as long as you deliver that price, we'll sell to you. Typically, though, people don't want to spend the money, especially trade buyers, until they know that they do have a period of exclusivity and they can finish off their due diligence at their leisure, or hopefully on a tight time frame, but they can make sure they cover off the areas they want to. So giving exclusivity is important timing in the process, because you want that party to really, from our perspective, we want to know that everything is on the table. We want to know that they're set up ready for their due diligence process. They can run a smooth process from that point forward. But we've got our own house to get in order for that as well. We need to make sure we've got the data room fully populated. We need to make sure that we've provided the information in difficult areas, maybe some more confidential information. We've got to make sure that we've provided that and got it all ready, so it can be a fairly quick process. And at that point, you can switch to the bidder that you choose. And as Bill's just said, it doesn't have to be the highest bidder. There will be factors involved. Like in the UK at the moment, we've got tax changes, budget changes next March. So when we're considering buyers today, we want to know that someone is definitely going to complete and will definitely complete before March, because the tax rates could double for vendors. And therefore, you may not take the highest offer, but you're going to look at what makes someone else the most deliverable offer and go with them. So yes, I think you just need to make sure that the process is all ready to run smoothly, and then at that point go into exclusivity.
Bill, you mentioned this strategy of maybe providing, a purchase agreement. I call it a seller-friendly purchase agreement to, a number of different parties, and having them redline it or mark it up. Can you talk about that strategy a bit, and when it might be used and useful in a process?
Yeah, this is just my opinion and my experience. I think that can work if the asset being sold is of a size, very large, or a very well-known brand. I think that smaller middle market companies, revenue in terms of US dollars, 20, 30, 50 million, I think that is difficult to get buyers willing to spend the time and the effort and the money with their lawyers to mark up an agreement, because we've tried that, and you get pushback, and groups just say, well, I'm happy to do the markup if I know I'm under exclusivity. And so sometimes you can overplay a strong hand. I think if you have a good asset for sale, you have a strong hand, but you have to be careful about overplaying it. We had a client recently, buy side, and the sellers asked us to do the same thing, mark up a purchase agreement, which was incredibly one-sided towards the seller. And that was frankly quite a bit of a turnoff. And our client refused to play that game and just wanted to submit the term sheet on what they would pay and a lot of other structures, how to handle some of the assets. It was a complicated deal. I was not a fan of that. I wanted us to follow the rules that the other side set up. We ended up not winning that. I think our bid was nowhere close to what other people were willing to apparently overpay for this. But it's been out there. It's something that I've tried to do, but I think quite often at our size, again, middle market deals, it might be a tougher road to hoe. You might scare away some otherwise viable buyers who would be able to cross the finish line in a different situation.
Michael, what's your experience with, granting exclusivity to parties When do you do it? Some of these things around strategies on the seller friendly or very one-sided purchase agreements to prospective buyers to get them to redline them. Maybe
my experience is the same as Bill's. We on our smaller transactions, we don't feel we have that ability to do that. I think we replace that with a very intense negotiation on the LOI. So our LOIs tend to be much longer than I would say your typical LOI. And we zero in on, I'll say, the key issues of a purchase and sale agreement in the LOI. So that's a way of compensating. Very often the question is, well, we can't tell you the indemnification limit because we don't have enough information. And we'll just say, well, tell us what you need and let's negotiate it now. I don't think in the history of M&A, anyone's done due diligence in the last 90 days and said, wow, you're better than I thought. We're going to increase the purchase price. It's a lot of, there's a lot of pressure downward, and so you want to make sure that there's not going to be any retrades going on. Our purchase and sale agreement, I think it's very important when people do it, not to put together what Bill described as on a scale of 1 to 10, and 9 being friendly, very, very friendly seller number. To put a 9, it should be like a 6 or a 5.5, because what happens is this, our client, the seller, falls in love with who gave them the best terms, who gave them the easier terms and conditions, and it may end up costing them a lot more money. And so, having a tough negotiation on purchase and sale agreement isn't the worst thing in the world. But yeah, we have no magic line to it, but let's say over 75 million in purchase price, we'll start looking at doing that. But below 75 million, I think it's a tough thing to do.
If I can jump in, Michael, just echoing that with this recent engagement we had, the purchase agreement, as I mentioned, from the seller was incredibly one-sided. I went through with a fine-tooth comb and I looked at the assets because it was a little complicated. We're buying some assets, we're not buying some assets. And I looked at the writing, the way that their lawyers, the seller's lawyers, put together the assets that were being conveyed. And very clearly, it included an office building, which we talked about as being worth, we had a estimation worth of about $2 million on this building. And so very clearly in the document we received from seller includes the office building. So we submitted our offer and we included the office building and the assets. And that was something that the seller representative came back and said, well, how come you're not paying us for the building? So it was a little frustrating that they put together, I think, a poor document that did not clearly stipulate that they were looking for a separate payment for that building.
Mm-hmm.